Hello again, and I'm starting this video with an apology. This is yet the fifth installment in a one-part series on how to protect your MetaTrader applications from being copied. The first part was quite different in that it was targeted in cases where you've perhaps been contracted to write some code, you've written it, you want to release the executable version to your customer so they can test before they pay, but you don't want them to simply keep that copy and never pay you. So it was an ability to embed an expiry in that code. The parts after that were targeted more at people who might be selling code that they've already written or selling expert advisors they've written, and how you can apply licensing to that. In the last of this series, number 4, or number 3 and 4, because it was a two-part, I showed how you can set up the licensed files on Google Drive. And the idea would be that you embed those files on Google Drive. It allows a customer to run against a given account number, and that account number would be matched up against a file on Google Drive, and if everything matches up, then the license is good and the customer can continue to use your expert advisor. If you haven't seen the earlier videos, I will leave links in the description because I'm simply picking up from the code that I left off there. So there'll be gaps in this code where I've already explained it in the earlier videos. Now, to the apology. I wrote the original code for that some time ago, and then I simply used that code in the video. Between the time that I wrote the original code and now, something has changed. And I said when I made the last video that the code was identical for MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5. That is still the case, but the MetaTrader 5 version simply didn't work. And I didn't test that thoroughly, and so I've released a video that says MetaTrader 5 worked, and it didn't. I'm going to explain today why that problem has come about, how we can test for it, and I can show you a workaround, which I actually think is now better than using the Google Drive storage mechanism. So let's get straight into the example and show you what's happened, why it's not working on MetaTrader 5, and then we'll move on and show you my ingenious workaround. So on screen here, I have the MetaTrader 5 version. I still have my license file on Google Drive. Let's open that up. Here is my file. It's the same license file I used last time. And I showed how you can get a link to that file with this get link. I've also got open this web license data.txt where I've taken that information and I've copied it into here so that I can simply use this without going back to Google Drive. The file name that I have for the license file, this is the name that was generated by the license file generator. And if I just scroll this up, there it is in my Orchard license. That's the original file that I created. The link from Google Drive, this is the full link that I got. The registration is this part of that link. So here it is. That's the actual file identifier on Google Drive. And then when we make the call to download this file from Google Drive, the code constructs this API call. So you can see it's slightly different to the link here in that it begins with drive.google.com, UC, export equals download, ID equals, and then the file identifier. I think in the earlier videos I had this export equals download at the end. It doesn't matter if you put that first or second, as long as you have export equals download and ID equals that. Now I had the web license test.mq5. I've also got the MQ4 version. Let me open that. And these two files are the same except for the properties at the beginning. And in fact, to show that the code is the same, I'm going to simply extract all of the common code into an MQH file so that you can see there's no difference between MetaTrader 4 and 5. So now this web license test.mqh file includes all of the working code, including the input statements. The MQ5 just includes that one file, and the MQ4 also just includes that one file. I'm going to save all of that, and I'll go to the MQ4 first because that's the one that is working, and then I'll show the MQ5. What's not working, I'll explain why. Web license test.mq4, I'll compile that. Great. I go to my MetaTrader 4. Here is web license test. I can open that. I've already generated the file, and as I said in the earlier video, if I leave the registration code blank, then it will generate a new file, and if I fill that in, then it will test the file. So I'm going to fill that in. Enter that. I'm on the experts tab, so I just say okay, okay, And now loaded successfully. Now testing license, valid license, the account number, the product, expiry, and the grace period, so on. That all worked fine. Let me go to the MetaTrader 5 editor. I'll compile the web license test.mq5. No compiler errors. All the code is exactly the same. Now I'm in the MetaTrader 5 terminal. I run the web license test. Enter the registration code. Now testing license. Oops, problem with license. Same license file, same code, but this is not working. So now let's go to the code and I'll explain where that's happening. So now I've opened the license webcheck.mqh file. That's in the includes here. And if I go down to the point where we actually load the file from the web, I have this default statement in the switch. I'm handling a case 200, which is a normal response from the web. But what I've found with MQ5, I'm getting a 303 response. Now a 303 is a redirect. It simply says that the address that I've called is telling me to go to a different address to get what I want. So the reason I'm not getting any message about it is that I've simply said return false. I'm going to just insert a statement here. So that I can get that unexpected response if I get something that's not a 200. So a -1 means I had an error in making the call. So that's handled. 200 is fine because I've got what I wanted. But the 303 is coming in here. You can get other things, and that's why I have the default. So you might get a complete error because the network has failed in some way. But the 303 is the one that's giving me problems. Now remember, this code is identical so far for MetaTrader 4 and 5. This is a single include file. So I go and recompile my test.mq5. Back to here, I'll clear these messages. Run the test again. Registration code, OK. Unexpected response 303, so a redirect. 303 responses are quite common in the internet, and Google Drive is using it to redirect your request for that file to another dynamically generated URL. So it actually changes the address of this file each time that's called. 303 responses are generally automatically handled by your client, whether it's MetaTrader in this case or Google Chrome. And I've got my Chrome here and I'm going to open that. I have a here and I'm actually going to take from this file. This is the API that the code is calling. If I paste that and hit enter, you see that I get the download attempt here. So I'm just going to cancel that. And if I now open the developer tools, I just slide that across a little. I go to network, doc, and then I'll do the same thing again. And cancel that. Now what we can see here, even in Chrome here, I'm getting the 303, which Chrome is then handling and automatically going to a different URL and getting a 200 response, which is what we expect. The reason the MetaTrader 4 works is that it is handling this 303 redirect and going to the new address. But MetaTrader 5 is not handling the 303. Now, there are a couple of things I can do to work around that. I'll show a small piece of code first, which I do not recommend you use. So here, right after this int error code equals, I'm just going to insert it as a commented block of code. All right, so as I'm saying, add this code to handle a 303 redirect, but it does create more problems. If response equals 303, so if we've got a request to redirect, then the address of that redirect is stored in the result headers that have been returned. Scroll that back a little. I'm searching for the start of that address, and the address begins with location : space. So I'm searching the result headers for location : space, beginning at position 0 with this string find, and then I'm adding 10, and 10 is just the length of this location : space because I don't want that, I just want the address that comes after it. Then I'm looking for the location end, and that's just the same thing, a string find, result headers, searching for a carriage return /r, beginning at this location start that I have. And then my new API is the substring of the result headers beginning with location start for a length of location end minus location start. I reset last error, and then these two lines are the same as the lines above, but I'm now calling with the revised API. Now, just to demonstrate why I do not recommend this, I'm going to uncomment that. And I'm actually going to print the new API. Right, go back to here, compile that. Back to MetaTrader 5, I'll clear these again, put in the registration code. Okay, testing the license. Here is the new API that I got, https://doc-00-30-docs. Error in web request 4014. That message comes because I do not have this doc030 docs.googleusercontent.com in my list of allowed addresses. So if I go back to tools here, options, allow web request for listed URL, I have drive.google.com, but I don't have this doc030 docs listed here. I can put it in there, so I can add this, but that can change. Certainly this part, the secure SC, these identifiers change on each call. If I ran this code again, you would find that that string is different to the new API. In fact, let me do that. And so these characters out here are different. You can see way out on the right hand side here, they're different from the line above. In this case, the server name is the same, but it can change. So because of that, I don't recommend this technique, because it means that you never quite know which URL you have to allow in the allowed web addresses. But I've included it there just to show you the code. I'm commenting it so it will still be there in the code if you download this later, but I don't recommend using that. And this is where I say that this appears to be a bug in MetaTrader 5. 303 responses should be handled by the client. MetaTrader 4 does handle it. I'm reasonably certain that when I first wrote this code years ago that it was handled in MetaTrader 5. Maybe I'm wrong. But MetaTrader 5 should handle it, and your browsers will handle it. If you simply enter that API URL into any browser, it will download the file correctly after handling the redirect. It just seems that MetaTrader 5 does not handle that, and given the restriction that you have to put web addresses into the allowed list, it means that I can't simply dynamically recall to a different address unless it's on the same server, and in this case it isn't. So 303 is quite a normal thing in the internet, and your client should handle it. And so now to the workarounds. Option 1, you can look for a file sharing system that does not use redirects. So you might want to try Dropbox or OneDrive. I thought about that, but then I thought, even if they don't use redirects now, I don't know that they won't start to use a redirect tomorrow. So I haven't even tried them. I don't know if those work or not, because I want something that's a little bit more future-proof. So then I've settled on my old friend GitHub. GitHub doesn't use redirects currently, and based on the way it works, I don't believe it will use redirects in the future. So I'm going to show you how to set up these license files on GitHub, and then I'll explain why I think this is even better than Google Drive. So here I am in GitHub. I'm just going to go new to create a new repository. I'm going to put all my licenses in a single repository. So calling this license, that's available. I don't need to worry about a description. I'm making this public so that anyone can read this. I said in the last videos that these files need to be public because you don't want to be granting specific access to each person you give a license to. It does mean that anyone who can find your Git repository can find these license files, but that's why I've already made sure there's no useful information inside the file. It's all encrypted. So there should not be a problem with that, but if you're worried about it, then maybe this isn't the solution for you. Even on the Google Drive solution though, anyone who had the address of a file could see that file and download it. It's just that they're a little bit easier to find on GitHub. So public, I can just create that repository, and now it's here. Now there are two ways that I can load my license files in here, I can go to this upload an existing file, and then I can simply drag my files in here, or I can use the choose your files to get a dialog prompt. That's a little bit cumbersome if you've got a lot of files, so I'm not going to use that, but it is there if you don't want to use Git itself. I'm going to, because this is on GitHub now, I'm actually going to use Git to manage my license files. To do that, there's already an address here. I click that button to copy this address. And now with the Explorer, I've gone to this location where I've been creating the files. I've been creating them in this license folder under Files Orchard. I'm going to delete that license folder to begin with so that I can clone my GitHub repository and begin again. And now I use TortoiseGit because I like to use a GUI, but for people who aren't using a GUI, I'm going to go to the command prompt now and enter the Git commands manually. So in the command prompt, first I'm going to just move to that directory and then git clone and paste in that address from GitHub. And I don't have anything yet, so I get this warning, I've cloned an empty repository. If I go back here, there is license, and it's empty except for this .git folder. So now I can actually go and generate that license again. I'll use MetaTrader 5, web license test. I won't enter the registration code, so I'm still using product 1, key 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as the customer's account number. Okay. That has generated a file. If I go back again, here is the file. Back to the command prompt. Git add -- all. Oops, wrong. I need to go into the license file first. And then I can commit. Have to include a message. And then I can push. Right, sorry, had a small credentials problem there. But yes, git push, once I've signed in properly, that's fine, and that has pushed up to GitHub. Let me go back to the browser and I'll just refresh this page. And there is my one file that I've loaded up as a license. Okay, so that takes care of getting the files into Git. And all of these commands I put at the command line, the add, commit, and push, you can put those into a batch file so that as you create these files, you just run the batch file and everything gets updated to Git. That's why I like this technique rather than dragging and dropping into the web browser. The next part, from Google Drive, we had to get an identifier for the file so we could issue that to the customer as their registration code. So if I just click on that file name, if I right click on raw and do copy link address. All right, now I'm coming back to the MetaTrader editor and I'm going to this web license.dat. And pasting that in. This is much simpler than Google Drive. There is the address, github.com, my account, license is the repository name, and then /raw/main. Main is the branch name, /, and then this part is actually just the name of the file that I uploaded. So the registration you give to your customer is just the file name. So now let's go back to the code and fix it so that we can use GitHub. Here in license web check, I just need to change this string API. I'll keep the old one, comment that. I will paste in this. So what I've done here is change, this is the URL, github.com, Orchard Forex Tutorials license raw main. %s then is the registration.lic, and that will download the file from github.com. That means that my registration now is just the file name, which makes life much easier. And now I'm also going to make a small change. This is the license file check.mqh file. And this is where I create the files, which you then upload later. Or if you're simply using license files that are loaded onto the client's machine, this also handles reading those files. And this is a change because there is also a difference between MetaTrader 4 and 5 in the way they write files. So I'm just going to add here in this file open statement where I'm calling file write file bin, I'm going to add or file ANSI. That's in the file gen function. I'm going to add the same thing in the file read function. File ANSI. That just changes the character encoding on the file so that it's going to be the same between MetaTrader 4 and 5. ANSI would have been the default in MetaTrader 4, and in MetaTrader 5 it is not. So that makes those two files the same. And now we can go on with generating the file and uploading it. And so if I now compile this, all working, hopefully I didn't make a mistake. I go to MetaTrader 5. Let me just clear all of these messages. Web license test, and in my registration I enter that. Oh, I forgot to enable github.com. So tools, options, github.com, and you'll see I also still have this old message. I'll fix that in a minute. So now I have MetaTrader 5 open, experts tab here so I can see the messages. I've gone into tools, options, and I've added github.com as an allowed web address. Just run web license test, paste in the registration code, and now it's working. So I have now testing the license, valid license. Here's my encrypted account number, the encrypted product code, expiry, and the grace expiry. And now I'm going to run the same thing on MetaTrader 4 using the same file name. Now normally you wouldn't be using the same file name because you would have different account numbers for the MetaTrader 4 and the MetaTrader 5 for your client, but because I'm entering the account number here and I'm just testing, I can use the same license file. And again, I get testing license, valid license, account number, product code, expiry, and grace. So those have all downloaded from GitHub quite successfully, and it's made it much easier now because there is no redirection. But I can go one step further, and this is why I think the GitHub option is actually better. Now, I've closed up a number of files just to make it a little cleaner, and I'm going to show why I think that the GitHub option is actually better. So here we've got web license test.mq5. This is just the starter file. Web license test does all of the work, and web license check or license web check that actually checks the license files. The registration code on GitHub is the same as the file name without the .txt extension. So I can do away with this because I can calculate that registration from the rest of this information. So let me just get rid of that. And instead I'm going to change it because I need to know the mode that I'm operating in. So I'm changing that to a Boolean INP testing rather than entering the registration code. So if we are testing, then I will generate the registration code and use that. And if not testing, then I'll generate the file. Now, I do need to make some more code changes for this because you can see here that I actually have an INP registration that's part of the constructor for license web. I'm not going to mess with that too much. I'm just going to remove this and make that an empty string. If I go into license web check, I can see that the license path uses this hash statement to create the file name and then just adds .txt. I'm going to create a new function that will set that as the registration. I just need to declare that. And I need to make that public because I'm going to be calling it from outside. That should do it. Let's just do a quick syntax check on that. That's fine. in web license check then. So after I've created license web with no registration here, I can just call set registration. And now instead of if INP registration is equal to an empty string, I just put INP testing. Actually, that should be not INP testing. So if we're not testing, then I will generate the file, and if we are testing, then I will test it. And there's no need for the customer to enter a registration code at all. Compile that. See if this works. So I can run license web test. Is this a test? Yes. And okay. And that works. Great. So that's why I think it might be better, because the file names are not some encoded file name. They're actually the same as the name that you've created, and you can simply let your customer run this. It will verify their account number against the product code and the product key that you've embedded into your application. And just to prove, I'll go back to MetaTrader 4, where I will again compile that web license test. And now I'll run this in the MetaTrader 4 version. Let me clear this. Is this a test? True. Valid license. Good. So this works now in both MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5 using files stored on GitHub. And they're relatively easy to maintain. You can simply generate these files here with some kind of code, and then going into Git, you call the git add, git commit, and then git push, and that will update your Git repository quite easily, much more easily than dragging files into Google Drive. Sorry again about my earlier error. This solution will work around that, at least until GitHub decides to introduce redirects before you download their files, but I don't expect that to happen, where I think it's far more likely with file sharing type services. So I hope this is an even better solution for you. Again, sorry, but this should solve the problem now. Until next time, thank you for watching.